This gospel reading, the calling of Matthew, is set in Capernaum. That's important. You may remember in the third chapter of Luke's gospel, we have Jesus opening the scroll of the prophet Isaiah. And he reads from the prophet Isaiah, and he's rejected at Nazareth, and he goes to Capernaum, and he makes Capernaum his hometown. And this event in calling Matthew happens in Capernaum. It's rather important. He was a tax collector at Capernaum. Capernaum was a very important place in the commerce life of the time of Jesus. It was part of what's called the Via Maris, which was a trading route that ran from Egypt, from Alexandria, all the way through present-day Israel, up into Syria to Damascus, and passed through Capernaum. Therefore, the tax collector at Capernaum would have been somebody of great consequence and would have been well off. Now, Matthew gets up and he leaves his tax collector post to follow Jesus. It's recorded in the second chapter of Mark's gospel, but there he's called Levi. Now, Jesus has a meal with tax collectors and sinners. Keep in mind that in the time of Jesus, the notion of having a meal was very, very significant, far more significant than today. We hear nothing about the menu. Never talk about the menu. Here people talk about the menu. What would you like to have for dinner? What's your favorite food? But in the time of Jesus, the menu was not important. The guest list, that's what was important. And so when you get to talk about Matthew here, the tax collector and his friends, the other tax collectors and the sinners, breaking bread with Jesus, that's very significant. When in the Semitic custom of the time, to break bread and to go to somebody's home for a meal was a sign of reconciliation. It was a sign of honor. It was a sign of belonging, community. The only place we ever know in the life of Jesus about the menu is at the Last Supper, where Jesus takes bread and takes wine. Otherwise, the food is not mentioned. And Jesus quotes from the prophet Hosea. He'll quote this again up here later in Matthew's Gospel in chapter 12. He'll say, "It is mercy I desire, not sacrifice." What does this mean to us? Somehow it means that Jesus welcomed tax collectors and sinners. He broke bread with them. Conversion doesn't happen before Jesus. Conversion happens after we encounter Jesus Christ. There's a tendency in the church, and maybe in our own minds too, that there is a certain purity about the followers of Jesus, and the others are on the outside. And yet, read the life of Jesus, and you'll find that it was tax collectors and sinners that were welcomed. The righteous religious people struggled with Jesus. It's an extraordinary thing that when we come to the church to welcome tax collectors and sinners and their equivalent in our society today, we place all sorts of restrictions around tax collectors and sinners, saying, well, you don't qualify, and are you registered, and do you fit in? But in the time of Jesus, the notion of breaking bread, the bonds of community, had to embrace those who were on the margins, those who were socially outside. It's a good thing to keep in mind. Discipleship in Jesus Christ means a certain openness. It means that in our families, in our communities, to withhold judgment about people and to see the blessing we can get when we break bread with sinners. and the blessing sinners can get if we are the image of Christ when we break bread. If we're not making judgments and we're not, it's mercy I desire, not sacrifice, said Jesus. Who is it that is a tax collector and a sinner in my life? And who is it that I need to welcome, symbolically break bread? But I need to welcome into my life to say, withhold your judgment. Don't put a person down. Don't think that the person are outside just because they differ with you. That could be in anything. It could be in religion, it could be in opinion, it could be in politics, whatever it is. We tend to make judgments. We tend to draw lines and divide people. And the whole following of Jesus Christ is an openness, it's an understanding, it's a welcoming, especially of welcoming people that didn't agree with Jesus. They were not part of his following. But after they meet Jesus Christ, after they encounter the Lord, then they experience a conversion. So we might keep that in mind today. As we journey through this day, we'll be tempted to make judgments about people, to put people down, to separate people. Let the Spirit of the Lord touch us, to open our minds, open our hearts, and to see the goodness, the possibilities, the grace, God's presence in tax collectors and sinners. Let us pause for a moment of prayer.